Just like to let our guests settle in a little bit. Welcome to all of you. Good evening. Welcome to the Hans Seidel Foundation. Welcome anybody who's trickling in. Just take a seat. We're looking forward to a very exciting event. As you know, we're going to be discussing the cooperation between the Isar and the Nile. We've entitled it such because you know that the Nile is a much bigger river than the Isar, but from our perspective, this river is as important to us as the Nile is in Egypt, and we know that we're going to be jumping into the discussion, talking about forms of cooperation between our two countries, Germany and Egypt, with a particular focus on the state of Bavaria. The Missio Munich is here as a guest here at the Hans Seidel Foundation. It's the fourth time now that we're going to be discussing the focus of Egypt. I'd like to present our guests, introduce them all. I'd also like to warmly welcome the chair of the Hans Seidel Foundation and Markus Ferber. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure for me to welcome you today to the panel discussion in the name of the Hans Seidel Foundation. Together with Missio Munich, we are organizing now for the fourth time a panel discussion. Monsignor Huber, we'd like to warmly welcome you and thank you for the very fruitful cooperation that we've had over the years. Solidarity with Christians in the Middle East is the focus of our action this year. As the chair of the Hans Seidel Foundation, as well as a member of the European Parliament, I am convinced that solidarity is crucial, and as well as the protection of all people, particularly minorities. And decentralization is an important part of this as well. Part of this is cultivating partnerships and also creating digitalization and opportunities to really address the issues that we're facing. Egypt is a crucial partner for Germany as well as for Bavaria. Taking on refugees from Sudan as well as humanitarian aid for flood-affected areas in Libya are some examples of our cooperation, as well as fulfilling the challenges of the Renaissance Dam and the way that we are taking on responsibility, creating a better future. And all of these projects fall under the UN sustainability goals. Egypt is a close partner of Germany's, and German schools and companies are part of public life in Egypt. I'm particularly happy that Hans Seidel Foundation has an important part in Egyptian society. There's project work that the foundation carries out in Egypt, and they fulfill the three goals of decentralization, climate protection, and inclusion. The three aspects, the economy, society, and climate, our goal is to address all three aspects equally and to move forward in sustainability. The dialogue and cooperation and learning from one another is something that's important to all of us. The cross-border cooperation with growing relationships form the basis for an open and future-oriented dialogue about peace and development. When we look at our developments in our relationship between the Nile and the Isar, it raises the question, how can we use our cooperation in order to create a sustainable bridge building between the two countries in order to pursue our sustainability goals here in Germany? In our panel discussion today, we want to open up this international dialogue between Germany and Egypt to talk about the economic ties and also ways in which we can deepen German-Egyptian partnerships. There are many topics that can lead to exciting discussions with experts. I'm very pleased that you have come, that you've come here today. I hope that you contribute to this special relationship. In the name of the Hans Seidel Foundation, I'd like to warmly welcome you to today's event. Thank you very much, Markus Ferber, member of the European Parliament. Perhaps you know that he was in Marrakesh in Morocco over the weekend at the very important meeting of the IMF and the World Bank, and he was part of a very important dialogue there. My name is Christian Sepper. I am the head of Missio Munich, and I have the honor of leading you through the evening. Before I'd like to just invite Monsignor Huber up here to the podium. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to thank the chair of the Hans Seidel Foundation, Markus Ferber. I'd like to thank him for the cooperation that he mentioned in his introductory statements, and the fact that now for the fourth time we've been able to look and see how here in Bavaria, here at the Missio Munich, which is a very Bavarian organization founded by King Ludwig, how can we here in Bavaria create opportunities for people in Asia, in the Middle East, all over the world, have an improved life quality? That is our part. And I think that it's always good to be in cooperation with one another and to look, see how it's possible to create this cooperation within the political framework. There are also religious implications, and there are economic opportunities as well. We have various aspects that are very important when it comes to sustainability. How can we create a situation in a positive way? I think that a word from the Gospel of Matthew is important to keep in mind here, that we are the salt of the earth. This can serve as a motivation for us to be active, because it's also something that we've been entrusted with, but it's also a task that we need to fulfill in order to see how can we create opportunities in cooperation with one another, for one another as well. How can we improve the quality of life for people in their countries? That is the task that we here at Missio Munich, with our cooperation partners, how we can support them, how can we implement this task. Thankfully, in the various countries on the ground, we have various organizations in various dimensions. And this year, looking at the Middle East, Syria, Lebanon, we have guests from those various countries, and particularly we have Egyptian guests. And so we're very thankful that our guests are here and that they've accepted this invitation in addition to a very demanding program, because here in Bavaria they've been visiting various dioceses, and they can show and tell us a little bit about what the situation is for Christians in Lebanon and Syria. And I'm very happy that they're here together with us tonight. And they can join in this discussion with experts from various fields. And that these various individuals can raise questions within these fields. It's very important to look and see how we can pursue these paths, how we can be unaffiliated from a specific party, focus on progress and keep in mind various populations from various aspects. And I hope that tonight that we can also draw inspiration from various sources, from project partners, as well as people there on the ground and in the various organizations. We can see how we can support them and help them. So I think this is a very lovely tradition that we have here at Hans Seidel Foundation, that we are invited here as a guest and we can move some things forward in politics, in the economy, and also in the church. So we can take on these issues. And to that end, I would like to wish us a very fruitful and interesting evening with a good discussion and inspiration.
Thank you, Monsignor Huber. To start, and before we're entering into discussion, before I welcome our guests onto the station, I would like to show you some scenes from Egypt. They come from one of our journeys to Egypt at the beginning of February this year. One of our guests will be speaking during this film. You are free to guess who it is. So let's start the movie and see some insights of Egypt. With 100 million inhabitants, Egypt is one of the highest populated cities in the Arab world. 90% of the population are Muslim, but Christianity, the roots of Christianity are bleeding many years back. The revolution of 2011 has led to 100,000 Coptic Christians to leave the country. How's the situation nowadays?
In the past, we had many problems as Christians. But in this time now,
In the
past, as Christians, we had a lot of struggles. Nowadays, that's different. Today's struggles not only affect us as Christians, but more as Egyptians. This is somewhat of a good sign. We're talking about Egypt's state citizens. It's not longer about the differences between the Muslims and the Christians. As Christians, we have the equal rights, just as the Muslims. We can celebrate our religion. And the government is funding us with property.
To construct a church in this new city.
In the past, Christians in Egypt had to build churches illegally. During the reign of the Muslim Brotherhood, they were persecuted and not part of society. Now that these times seem to be over, you can feel this weight lifting from the Christian community in Egypt. We serve all people, and we make no difference. We not only believe in our religion in church, but also outside of church. We have to respect one another. All the problems facing our country affect us all equally, no matter whether we're Christian or Muslim. We have to work for one society, not only for Christians.
And develop the society, not only the Christian. after the Russian and Ukrainian war.
We can feel the prices for cost of living have gone up due to the Ukrainian war. We have to deal with this as Christians and as part of the church. People are actively looking for work, but their wages cannot cover the cost of living. We're trying to help those in need and the poor parts of the population, but we cannot do anything against the cost of living and the rising prices. It's the government's responsibility. Even though the number of Christians has decreased, they still play an important role, especially for people with disabilities. Aid for people or children with disability can be received by people regardless of their religion.
How to be the light and the soul, the light of the light of the world.
How are we supposed to be the light of the world and the salt of the world if we are a good example for our religion? In daily discourse, we're able to solve our problems together, and that's the only way. At least that's my personal opinion, and I am convinced of this. Recently, Egyptian Christians were in danger. In 2013, these attacks reached a high point. Many buildings, many churches of Christians were attacked. The perpetrators were involved with the Muslim Brotherhood. The school, Franciscan school, was burned down. It was one of the best schools in the entire region.
Terrorism was directed.
Terrorism was actively directed at us Christians. Many churches were attacked. The point was to murder Christians. It's comparable to the Islamic State. The government, luckily, was able to take control. For example, in the Senate. Nowadays, we can feel much more secure.
We are very safe here.
We are very safe here. The Egyptian government is criticized internationally for its strict policies, but it has led to some relief for the Christian population. The school was re-established and is full of life. Children from Christian families are learning together with Muslim students. A new generation is growing up. Thank you. Those were some first insights into the situation in Egypt, and we are so grateful to see some of our guests. First of all, our guest from Egypt, the Coptic-Catholic Bishop of the Giza Diocese, the Bishop of the Pyramids. Welcome, Bishop Thomas Adly. The stage is yours. Let me use this opportunity to introduce another Coptic Catholic bishop. Let me just welcome you officially. You can get seated here. Anwar Pola Aliou, we all know him as Abuna Mata. He is a long-term friend of ours. We met in Egypt in February, and we are seeing each other for the very first time, so a warm welcome to you. Another partner or friend joining us in this discussion will be the member from my hometown district of Miesbach, Bad Tölz, Wolfratshausen, a beautiful city, Alexander Radwan. He's the member of the German Bundestag. He's a member of the Foreign Committee, and he is well aware of the situation in the Middle East. We're all happy to start the discussion shortly. We are experiencing very difficult times. You all know when you're reading the news. We've planned this meeting beforehand, but I'm sure it will affect our discussion slightly. Of course, the situation between Israel and Hamas, and with Egypt being kind of in the middle, it might have an impact in this discussion. Another point will be education. We just saw it in the video. It will also play a role during our discussion. It's especially important in Egypt with a young population. Laureen Adelan, welcome. She is part of the Bavarian Education Foundation. Welcome. I am especially grateful to welcome someone who's been, prior to this meeting, he said that during the 80s he's contributed to the education framework. He was in Tunisia. He's been the economic minister here in Bavaria. Now he's the president of the German Arabic Friendship Society, Dr. Otto Wiesheu. A warm welcome. Here's one more seat just reserved for you. We will start with a small discussion round. I have some questions, and of course later on during our discussion there's always the choice for you guys to ask any questions. So when we're opening the discussion, you can go to the microphone and ask your question. So as an introduction, let's have some Q&A. Let's have a Q&A session. We have representatives from various different societies, the Central Committee for Christians, the Bavarian, the Coptic-Catholic community. So a lot of people who are closely connected to the Hans Seidel Foundation. We are very happy to start the discourse. Let me start. We can't not discuss it. The current situation is not our priority today, but when we're talking about the cooperation in terms of education, when watching the news, reading the news, I think it's affecting every single one of us, the situation between Israel and Palestine. Our foreign minister, Annalena Baerbock, went to Cairo and it's really a big part for Germany. Alexander Radwan, let me ask you this question. Was it right for Annalena Baerbock to go to Cairo? Did she do a good job? I was not part of her visit, but yes, it was justified for her to go to Egypt. Let me add, I would have preferred to see the viewpoint of Christians in Egypt, because it might give a better picture of the situation. We need to use all channels there are. Egypt is definitely has an important role in this region, and it's only a country like Egypt contributing to a freedom treaty between these countries. And this viewpoint, the Western viewpoint in the Foreign Office, there was some hesitation, but we definitely recognize the importance of seeking communication. In the end, we have to have an intense dialogue of how we can regain peace during these nations. Therefore, it's crucial for Germany to be pragmatic, to be realistic, because in this region we are only divided by the Mediterranean. So that's what we've experienced over time, be it Syria, Libya. Please interrupt me if I'm talking too much. After the Ukrainian war, discussion was about the positioning of these countries, and someone said to me, Mr. Radwan, I understand the situation with Ukraine, and he mentioned Palestine, Libya. That's their normalcy. That's what they're used to live with every day. And that's why so many people treat it differently. But it's definitely crucial. Let me not use the term freedom, especially during what we're currently experiencing in this situation. But how can we ensure that this situation becomes somewhat bearable and livable for people? Bishop Thomas, we are very happy that you're joining us this evening. At the beginning of September and October, you went to Germany, and the situation was quite different than what was your experience. How do you experience the situation in the Middle East? Is there concern? What's your personal observation? Is there anything you could share with us? Ich möchte mich zuallererst bedanken. Es ist mir wirklich eine Ehre, heute Ägypten auch als Christ zu vertreten. Ich bin sehr dankbar, Ägypten zu repräsentieren. Es ist mir eine große Ehre, heute mit Ihnen hier allen anwesend zu sein, und bedanke mich für die Einladung. Die Lage ist natürlich schwierig, wenn wir jetzt über den Nahen Osten sprechen. Insbesondere der Krieg zwischen Israel und der Hamas. Ich denke, und so sage ich es auch immer wieder, ein Krieg ist ein Krieg. Es gibt keine Beschönigung dessen. Wir müssen natürlich wissen, dass jeder Krieg auch eine Grenze hat. Wir können keinen Krieg ohne Grenzen. Ein Krieg ohne Grenzen gibt es nicht. Natürlich muss sich ein Land selbst verteidigen können. Vielleicht kann man diese Grenze minimal überschreiten. Aber ein Krieg zwischen zwei Ländern bedeutet nicht, dass wir die gesamte israelische oder palästinensische Bevölkerung dafür zur Verantwortung ziehen können. Meines Erachtens nach müssen wir zusammenarbeiten, dafür sorgen, dass wir diesem Krieg ein Ende setzen können und das so schnell wie möglich. Thank you. I think that's an important appeal, and especially concerning your political position concerning the situation. You come from a country where, Ms. Atalan, you have partners, you have many programs, and Egypt is a country with diverse challenges. We just heard it in the video. There's societal problems, and now with this crisis in the neighboring country, Israel might add on top of that. So, Ms. Atalan, how would you describe the challenges that are already imminent there? Could you guide us through it a bit, and what kind of programs?
First, perhaps I should present what our work is. As the Educational Association of the Bavarian Economy, that we have a focus on development and in Africa, particularly on Egypt. That's one of our partner countries. And something that's exceptional about what we do is that we don't just work with politicians. At times we do, depending on the project, especially if the project is financed or started by a government project, but it's not that we are doing political work locally, but looking at the current conflict. We are not compelled in any way to take a political stance, but that we can continue our work in spite of the political situation. The challenge for us specifically is, let me just say, the economic sort of tension. That's been a very major issue. We work with the civic population. We have a lot of projects in order to continue to educate people so they have a better opportunities economically later on. We work with various companies in Egypt and various associations as well, because with better development, with better planting practices, that's crucial for the population. And we've seen over the past few months and years that it's definitely been a problem bringing products to market based on the Ukrainian war. And in order to also fulfill the need and demand from the population, as we've seen that with inflation, that's been a major challenge for us currently. Thank you. Mr. Vishoy, you said that you've been active in the region for years, for decades, that you've been well connected. Perhaps you could give us a bit of a perspective if we step back as well, with looking at these larger cameras, perhaps giving us an overview of the country. How would you say that, what are the various current issues with Egypt? Are we moving into a different era with respect to the war in Russia and Ukraine? Or is it more of a stable situation nowadays with Egypt? How would you describe the situation? With respect to my many years of experience in Egypt, around the 60s and mid-60s, there in Egypt, we had good contact with youth organizations that we also visited. And then later, when I was chair of the Hans Seidel Foundation, and we had a so-called Nile Center that we positioned there with various communities in order to work towards democratic processes locally and democratic processes and self-organization. And this was difficult then during a more socialist system. There we tried to bring companies to Egypt, and we succeeded to a certain extent. We were able to have a hospital there. We were able to support the education of medical staff, and we were able to create a situation where we had a good cooperation. I also remember the visit that we had in the east of Egypt, or the east of Cairo, and there's been a lot of progress there. We've determined, though, that the growth of the population has superseded the growth of jobs, and it's been very difficult. It's no surprise, really. We have Egypt as importing the greatest import of food, especially of rice, that all of these food prices are much more, they've gone up significantly, massively even. And so this is pushing poverty up. It has been very difficult for the country. Now we've seen that unrest in the country as a result of that. We've also seen, with respect to the Christian church there is some stability now. But from the Israeli perspective, it's understandable that they would fight back, given the horrific attacks that they have experienced. That's understandable. And today there was an interesting article. Mr. Cornelius in the Süddeutsche Zeitung, a local magazine, that the focus of the war, the goal of the war, should be to limit the threat to Israel and to reestablish security and to push back against terrorism and to stop an escalation of violence. So even after the war, we don't need a complete destruction, but we need a successive situation in which slowly we can move towards a solution in the Middle East. Since 2002, we've had the so-called Middle East Quartet. The US, Europe, Russia, for example. And within 2 years, the goal was to create peace. Given various situations, especially what happened 2 years later, in 2004, 2007, in Washington as well as in Berlin, we tried to push forward that solution. It failed. The escalation continued. And we can only hope that we don't have a scorched earth policy, but that we don't have a situation that then ripples and spreads into Lebanon and Syria. I can just put this sort of simply, that we should look towards really maintaining human rights, and that this complete destruction doesn't take place. Otherwise, over the long term, we will have greater problems even than we have today. And the bishop said this as well. It may be the case that we need to move towards humane situations. And that's what the Hans Seidel Foundation is all about. We need to come towards a more balanced situation in order that it's not just about Israel and Palestine here too, but we want a more peaceful situation. I hope that this is not a game changer. We are hoping that the situation will change in the Middle East, and that we hope this is not going to create a situation where we cannot have any more progress. Just like to jump on that and complete this thought. When we look at the awful brutality, the horrendous acts that have taken place at the hands of Hamas, that certainly calls for reaction. And the reaction is going to come. Israel as a state, it is in its interest and in the future interest to defend itself. It must defend itself and must react. And Hamas also counted on a reaction. At the same time, we've seen developments over the last few years that have been positive. We've seen the Abraham Accords. I also remember the discussions that took place between Saudi Arabia and Israel. And that's why Egypt is such a crucial country in this region. Egypt has channels of communication with both parties in the region. And Egypt could contribute towards influencing this conflict so that it doesn't erupt with unforeseen consequences, drawing in countries such as Lebanon. Syria has already been infected by the conflict, but Lebanon has been a country that's been very unstable for many years. And we have the same interplay between Christians and Muslims in Lebanon as well. And if you looked at the various different religious confessions there, it's reflected in the constitution of the country. But if we look at the long-term consequences of refugees from Palestine in Lebanon and from Syria, and this growing population in Lebanon and the growing influence of Hezbollah, see that Lebanon is confronted by the multi-religious fabric of the region, and we need to work to the extent possible in every way towards, on the one hand, emphasizing that Israel has a right to exist, but also to strengthen and to help the countries to have a process in order to prevent the worst that could happen. You've correctly said that there in the region we need to avoid a scorched earth policy or an eruption of violence. Certainly the concern regarding the border between Israel and Egypt, the question now is whether or not to allow refugees to flow from the Gaza Strip into Egypt. I'd like to connect that with another example. In February, Bishop Thomas showed us this scene from the social challenges. One crisis wasn't there yet, the issue of Sudan, which is on the other side of Egypt. But over the course of the year, as the crisis became more acute and refugees were coming from Sudan to Egypt, perhaps you can describe that challenge for us, particularly for you as a representative of the church. What was the concrete response there? Some refugees were Christian, some were Muslim, but perhaps you can describe the challenges there and tell us a little bit about that. This other example of refugees, perhaps that would help us to understand the challenge with refugees from Gaza.
Ich glaube, vor noch 2 Monaten hat unser Präsident die Lage der Flüchtlinge adressiert. Unsere Bevölkerung liegt jetzt bei 110 Millionen. Und es gibt 8 Millionen Flüchtlinge allein in Ägypten. 9 Millionen. 9 Millionen Flüchtlinge in Ägypten. Es gibt viele Syrer, sudanische Flüchtlinge. Und innerhalb der letzten 3 Monate gab es viele Flüchtlinge aus dem Sudan. Am 6. Oktober gab es in meiner Stadt, es gibt viele Menschen aus dem Sudan. In der Stadt, aus der ich komme, haben wir für die Vereinten Nationen quasi Aufnahmemöglichkeiten. Und ich denke, dass diese Flüchtlinge und jetzt die Flüchtlingslage, ja, was können wir per se tun? Was können wir für diese 8 Millionen Flüchtlinge tun? Das ist eine riesige Zahl. Das ist eine sehr große Zahl. Also 9 Millionen. Ich denke, 1 oder 2 Millionen mehr macht da auch keinen großen Unterschied mehr. Yes. Wenn wir jetzt aus Sicht der Palästinenser sprechen, die Sinai-Kronen und Ägypten, wir sind natürlich sehr bestürzt über die aktuelle Lage, die Krise zwischen Israel und Gazastreifen, Palästinenser. Für uns ist es natürlich schwierig, noch weitere Flüchtlinge aufzunehmen. Deshalb ist es, denke ich, wichtig, dass unser Staatspräsident vor 2 Tagen angekündigt hat, dass wir Hilfsgüter schicken können. Wir können das Möglichste tun, um medizinische Versorgung, Lebensmittelversorgung in das Land zu schicken. Aber sie müssen trotzdem in ihrem Land bleiben, da wir schlichtweg keine weiteren Flüchtlinge aufnehmen können. Und es ist auch das Recht der Ägypter, dass sie diese Fazilitäten auch haben. Wir sind sehr bestürzt, wir sind sehr traurig für das palästinensische Volk. Mr. Radwan, do you think for the Federal Republic, will it be a task for the Federal Republic to become active in this region, be it financially, and after what Bishop Thomas just described? Let me first of all talk about or add something to Bishop Thomas' point of view. President El-Sisi mentioned it. It is understandable. I mentioned Lebanon. I think they have more than 1 million Palestinian refugees which have been living there for a very long time, but they are at no point able to leave there, and that's why Lebanon is in its current situation. I also want to remind us of the video we saw in the beginning and a part of where the Christian school was burned down. Back then, there were certain terrorist activities by the Muslim Brotherhood, and we shouldn't forget that this Muslim Brotherhood, which stems from Egypt, is cooperating with Hamas. And if we open the border, it might be difficult to follow who is entering the country. So there's a conflict in Egypt with the Muslim Brotherhood that is ongoing until this day, and the fear is justified that maybe terrorism might enter into Egypt, and that's something which is definitely not contributing to Egypt's situation. Back then, we didn't know each other. It was for the very first time in Egypt. My father was Egyptian, and he left the country over 60 years ago. where the population was at 30 million. And this country in itself is a challenge to modernize it, to, especially in light of the younger population. We have a birth rate of 2 million per year, and we need to ensure that the younger generation has a good economic and social perspective to ensure that they can prosper apart from the governance style in Egypt, to make sure that the younger people are not getting attached to terrorism. And this in itself, Bishop Thomas, is definitely a huge challenge, and it is a challenge for Egypt to take on this issue. I could talk on for hours. It's definitely a huge problem in the implementation in light of all the topics and factors. So we need to ensure that Egypt is a mediator because it has some kind of stability, and we have to do our utmost to keep this stability. And I think Germany will be committed to this process, especially in the Gaza Strip, ensuring whatever is possible to make sure that Palestinian people not belonging to Hamas get the necessary supply and medical supply they need. One example to move one step further, it's an exciting example, so I personally think, looking at economic cooperation and looking at the opportunities for Egypt, also for Germany and the Free State of Bavaria. Moving Egypt is a buzzword. The project by Siemens, further companies such as the Deutsche Bahn, which received these big offers to improve the rail track in Egypt. It's one of the biggest projects in the history of Egypt. It's definitely going to immensely improve Egypt's rail network. Could this be an example for the future? How can Bavarian companies, German companies get active in this area? How can you be successful as a partner for Egypt? Because I think the international competition is definitely very high, thinking of the US and Russia. They are as strong as we Germans are. How can we be successful? This project by Siemens is a massive project for Egypt in many ways, as was the expansion of the Suez Canal. When thinking of transportation of goods, of people, it's definitely justified. Overall, improving and expanding the infrastructure is essential. On top of that, education, the practical training, university training. We have this German university in Egypt. I think it needs more exchange and more cooperation. I think it's also good for Egyptian students coming to Germany for their studies, and it definitely has shown to be successful, proven to be successful. It's also something we need at home. From my personal experience, I can say that any kind of investment from German companies in Egypt will always be beneficial. They lead to the creation of jobs. In addition, in the food sector, of course, importation of goods is very high. There's certainly methods with which we can improve the healthcare system, and agriculture is an important point. Certain foods, transportation and distribution of goods. A lot of certain food is perishable. For 15 years ago, they had the best strawberries in when I was traveling there. But transportation methods are essential, because if you do not have the right transportation choices, the food will go bad. And improving the infrastructure is definitely a contribution, again, to agriculture, to food, to feed the population, ultimately. And they might be less dependent on importing goods. So those are one of the crucial points where we in Germany have a lot of options and possibilities to contribute Egypt in this aspect. Having an institution to store goods and food, here we can definitely act to help the entire Egyptian community to prosper and benefit from it. So this is definitely something with which we can help. Ms. Adly, if a country such as Egypt is modernizing itself, I know it from African countries, there's always this question of whether the population can help or interact, meaning if there's a creation of new jobs, do the people have the necessary training? And what kind of areas should we take a look? That's interesting, because especially in developing countries, there's always this issue of having high qualified people, a high infrastructure. When looking at these new projects by Siemens, for example, and I think New Cairo, I think it's called, we talked with a colleague from Siemens. He was the lead of this project for the entire region of Egypt, and he told us that the majority of it was finished within 2 years. And I think in Germany we are definitely overwhelmed by this statement, because sometimes we can act immediately. There's a lot of potential on the one hand. On the other hand, we can see a population, a generation of many young people living in rural areas which cannot benefit from this movement. And that's definitely the generation which is endangered, because they do not have the qualifications, they follow the media, they see what kind of chances they're missing out on, so it's very difficult for them to be integrated. That's actually our starting points. That's how we try to offer them experiences from practice. We're working with public schools that are accessible by a larger proportion of the population. We're trying to have professionals working there after their training in the dual education system in Germany, to make sure that they can work for small and medium-sized companies in Germany, or even large enterprises. What we're doing is especially for Egypt is the security of the food sector, which is another important point. Everyone's talking about climate change. We have this issue in the water sector, advising farmers that they can have a more profitable agricultural benefit. So through this, we can maybe not directly close the gap, but it's at least a starting point of having a more diversified opportunity for Egypt in our cooperation. And that's how we try to cover all possible aspects to ensure, in light of minorities and in light of religion, that we can kind of satisfy the population. That's essential. Bishop Thomas, can you confirm this? Because we hear it a lot from countries. As you both said, there's a young population, jobs, economic survival. If young people don't find this perspective in their country because simply there's a lack of options, And it's all about leaving their hometown, home country. We can see it in Lebanon, Syria, other regions. Do you also see that taking place in Egypt, maybe also in your communities, that young people are looking for a different option for their future? Would you say that people in Egypt have a different view of the future? Das ist eine sehr interessante Frage. Ich glaube, für die junge Generation in Ägypten und insbesondere aufgrund der fehlenden Arbeitsplätze. Es gab einige Projekte innerhalb der letzten 5 Jahre. Wir hatten wirklich diverse Projekte, viele Arbeitnehmer. Insbesondere, nur um ein Beispiel zu nennen, es gab wirklich viele Arbeitnehmer in der Region Kairo, viele Projekte, die die Infrastruktur verbessern wollten. Ich glaube, innerhalb dieser 5 oder 6 Jahre haben wir viele Infrastrukturen verbessern können. Vor 6 Jahren kam man vom Flughafen in die Stadt und es hat ungefähr 3 Stunden gedauert. Heute beträgt die Reisezeit 45 Minuten. Wir haben ein besseres Schienennetz, insbesondere in der Zusammenarbeit mit Siemens und weiteren Unternehmen, deutschen Unternehmen vor allem, ist es uns jetzt möglich, dass viele neue Züge von Al-Sunna nach Massamutra, nach Alexandria, nach Oberägypten fahren können. Heißt, wir haben viel Arbeit in diesen Regionen. Natürlich gibt es dennoch viele offene Arbeitsplätze und Arbeitslosigkeit. Ich freue mich aber dennoch über die Fortschritte und natürlich ist nicht alles perfekt. Aber es ist auch nicht alles schlecht. Wir arbeiten konstant daran, die Verhältnisse weiter zu verbessern. Das ist, was ich als Christ und als Ägypter sehen kann. Zweitens, das denke ich, viele ermutigt. Innerhalb dieser letzten 5 und 6 Jahre hat die Regierung die bürokratischen Prozesse reduziert, leichter gemacht. Und innerhalb von 5 Tagen kann man jetzt alle Dokumente für das bevorstehende Projekt anfragen. Und das ist natürlich wirklich sehr gut, insbesondere auch für die Sicherheit des Landes. Jetzt kann man Geld dort investieren, weil man die Sicherheit auf den Straßen innerhalb der Gesellschaft beobachten kann. Wir sind ähnlich wie die europäischen Länder. Natürlich gibt es auch in Ägypten Terroristen, aber wir fürchten uns auch immer vor dem internationalen Terrorismus und können nicht sagen, dass es nur muslimische Terroristen oder christliche Terroristen gibt. Ich glaube, dass wir alle besorgt sind über Terrorismus weltweit. Deshalb habe ich auch gesagt, und das, was wir im Film gesehen haben, jetzt sind wir sicherer. Natürlich gibt es immer noch viele Polizeikräfte auf den Straßen. Vor 2 Tagen, bevor das Vatikanmuseum in Italien, da hat man die Armee gesehen, Polizeikräfte. Ich glaube also, dass wir uns immer um die Sicherheit der Zivilgesellschaft sorgen können, aber nichtsdestotrotz haben wir viel mehr Sicherheit im Land. I can confirm that. I saw many police officers, especially in front of public institutions in Egypt, which were kind of attacked by terrorism. Germany is an important partner, especially in terms of security. It's all about how can we ramp up police forces. And Germany is an important partner in this term. Federal Republic, with the last government, German government, we confirmed one order, and there was a discussion in the German Bundestag. Is it right from today's perspective and how the situation changed? I think that's an important topic. Maybe you can describe it briefly.
Let me just say something on another point. I just have to leave at 1:30 anyway, you know that. I just want to say something about education. When I'm asked about what the most important things for Egypt are, then I just say education, education, education. In this respect, in addition to the academic area, the universities, there's also the practical educational aspects. We know that it's very important for medium to small businesses and for handicrafts. And from the German perspective, we know that it's very important to cultivate employees. And simply put, the social status of individuals is often associated with an academic degree. And the problem is that people are trying to get a diploma instead of really useful training programs. We have a couple good examples from GIZ, for example. And we've talked about Gerd Müller regarding through GIZ to have funding flow towards training programs. We also want to build these so-called clusters where people can be trained and train themselves. For example, there are some wonderful German schools, but the idea being that we have large companies that can train individuals that will then have the promise of a job at the company or in Germany. This is something that would really motivate young people and show them how they can feed their families. And it's something that would also be successful than in a more conservative country such as Egypt, where people want to, start a family. That would be a core priority. And regarding the economy, you mentioned the train project with Deutsche Bahn. I just really want to ask the Egyptian guests to be understanding. It's typical in Egypt to think about infrastructure in a big framework. That you think about Giza, the pyramids, etc. But with respect to an economic perspective or economic opportunities, we want to build that out also for SMEs, for medium-sized companies. And Egypt is really only at the beginning there. When we talk about the military, for example, that makes it difficult to develop a certain momentum. If you think about a young German person who's going to start a company, someone does a freelance activity, those opportunities are available in Germany and not in Egypt. So unfortunately, many people are unemployed or don't have activities because they can't pursue those freelance opportunities. If you want to say we need some more momentum in this area. And Egypt does have extreme financial problems in invest in certain projects, and as a result, for example, in fall last year, there was a massive devaluation of the Egyptian currency. And the last time that I was there was 60% inflation. And so, as a result, the population has become poorer. So we have the poorer population that's fighting for just their survival every day, but we also have the middle classes that are fighting to survive. They cannot afford schools and training for their children, so it's very necessary that, in addition to the big projects, that in addition to infrastructure, that we have time and we take the time to implement reforms. And now to your question regarding military equipment. It's a very difficult discussion here in Germany. And I remember at the time, years ago, maybe some of you remember as well, Werner Höver, the trip that from Franz Josef Strauss to Saudi Arabia when he advocated for weapons exportation. I'd just like to remind everyone of last year. From the European side, for our part, we were really pleading for many people to support the war in Ukraine. And, for example, India did not support Ukraine, did not denounce Russia for the aggression. There in the UN, for example, we had a majority of states that denounced the aggression, but the population was not represented, because in India, the most populous country in the world, did not denounce the war. And if you speak with India about Ukraine, then you're immediately confronted with the question, yeah, we have a conflict with China, we have a conflict with Pakistan, and the only one who supports us is Russia. That's the perspective from India. How can you expect us to vote against Russia? So when it comes to security and military equipment, it's a difficult topic, but it's an elementary point when it comes to foreign policy. And that's why it's very important that we speak with the various states and see how we can support them, in what framework. When we're talking about the supply of parts to Saudi Arabia and various requests that they have. Here in Germany, we simply need to step back and take a step back from this policy of not doing anything, because then we don't address these topics. It's not about business, it's about influence. And with respect to Russia and China, they are taking these issues of influence very seriously, and that's why it's crucial that we talk about these issues as well. Thank you very much. I want to take the opportunity to look at the clock. I just need to get to Berlin. That's the issue. I'm very thankful that Mr. Radwan joined us this evening. He has to leave in just a few minutes. I don't want to let you leave, however, before I open this up to our guests to quickly perhaps ask a few questions, perhaps to give you the opportunity, Mr. Radwan, to respond. And then we'll wish you all the best on your way to Berlin and to provide information to the German government. Are there questions for Mr. Alexander Radwan? Yes, please. If you have a question, then please ask it quickly. Yalla. Hi, I'm from Missio Munich. You've described what needs to change when it comes to stronger cooperation and strengthening SMEs and this. Do you see some change there in that area? Or do you think that due to the various conflicts that it's actually taken a step backwards? The most recent conflicts are certainly not helping in that respect. But I said at the beginning that Egypt, from my perspective, Egypt does not have an analysis problem, it has an implementation problem. We need to use all of our power to support the country, partly financially, also in respect to education, And as Germans, we can be more involved, more strongly in the area of education. We can only do that when we connect that to various conditions regarding market openings. And if we look at those that are the countries that are most financially supportive of Egypt are the Gulf states, Qatar, Saudi Arabia. They realize how important it is for Egypt to remain stable. But they're also a bit impatient. And this combination is to say, yeah, we want to help you, but we also need to create the conditions. If we talk about the market economy, we want to make sure that market economy is creating growth and prosperity. It's important when we have those discussions, then I realize oftentimes that the other party doesn't even have the same idea or conception of those issues. So from a German perspective, we need to support it, but also understand the conditions. And when I'm talking about the military, there's also a challenge. With respect, the military receives everything, underwear, the noodles, everything that they need. It's another issue. From your perspective, what's the right process with respect to diplomacy as well? For example, you would address the issue of Russia and China. Right now, we are in a situation in which our foreign minister is saying what all these countries are doing incorrectly. What is the right step to take with respect to these countries? That question came right before the taxi arrives. The government has a very feminist policy, whatever that means. Feminist foreign policy. The peak of diplomatic art we saw in Qatar. That was when the German sports result was a disaster. And we also had a moment there where the Minister of the Interior wore something that my father would have seen as impossible. That, everyone was shaking their heads. What is she wearing on her arm? Right now, we're living in a situation where the emir from Qatar, given these events, he's been an important discussion partner, particularly with respect to Hamas. And we've seen that our foreign minister and Scholz as well is going to fly to Israel and perhaps on to Cairo. Let me just say, we need to greet and address these countries and these representatives on the same level and to look them in the eye, not look down upon them. And if you get involved in our German policies, with respect to religion and the freedom of religion, that needs to be addressed. But we need to address these countries as equal partners and not only just follow the trend, for example. We need to focus on what unites us. That's the desire for peace in the region, hopefully. That's education. It's the youth issues, the issue of agriculture and food security. There are so many common interests. But then there are issues where we have differences of opinions, and we can address those with our partners, but not just to follow a trend and a hashtag. I hope I'm not going to keep you too long. I have 30 seconds. Thank you very much for this incredible discussion and really valuable insights. You mentioned something, the educational, professional training. And I think that that's very decisive. You know that I am an advisor to the Egyptian president. We have a group of 14 experts worldwide, and one of the most important topics is professional training in Egypt. We often talk about, in this discussion, about German training programs, and we're asking often for support. And as an advisor to the president, we would be very happy if you would come to us with suggestions and proposals. And I would like to also add something to what Mr. Vishoy said. You already addressed the issue of agriculture. I would like to see models, that models are created, and to see how you would envision such a model so that we can create solutions to the challenges that we have. I think it's important that we in agriculture can avoid some of the issues that you mentioned already and to save resources. And perhaps you could speak to that further. Thank you. We are in contact. We'll stay in touch. Thank you very much. Shukran. Thank you. Wish you a good flight, good trip to Berlin. All the best. And see you soon. Yeah, don't forget to give your microphone back to us or we'll hear you in the car. Goodbye. I'd like to use the opportunity now, the remaining time that we have. I hope you're not too hungry, but I'd like to give the last three here in our panel to answer questions that you may have. Please just come to the mic and use this opportunity. If you don't have questions, I have a few. Nope. Okay. Then I'd like to ask Bishop Thomas. We've talked about various aspects. What are your expectations from, or the expectations of Egypt for Europe, for Germany? We've heard some topics, but perhaps from your perspective, what is the expectation or perception? Is Germany an important partner? Or do we act as though we know everything that's already been mentioned? Perhaps you could confirm that? Zuerst einmal möchte ich Ihnen danken für die Zusammenarbeit mit Ägypten, vor allem mit uns als Kirche. Wir sind Teil der Gesellschaft in Ägypten. Und wenn wir soziale Projekte in den Diözesen, sind wir auch in der gesamten Gesellschaft tätig. Wir haben auch kirchliche Angelegenheiten, aber es gibt auch einen Aspekt, und das heißt die soziale Arbeit für die gesamte Gesellschaft, für die gesamte ägyptische Gesellschaft. Und was ich von Ihnen erwarte, Sie müssen jetzt Ägypten besuchen und sehen. Sie sind alle herzlich willkommen, auch die Pyramiden anzuschauen. Aber Sie müssten auch das neue Land sehen, das moderne Ägypten, was sich verändert hat. Und Sie können auch sehen, wie unsere Regierung arbeitet. Es sind so viele gute Sachen. Und Sie können auch die ganzen Flüchtlinge sehen in den Straßen. Ich glaube, so können Sie wahrnehmen, Sie können da sehen, was wir genau machen in Ägypten. Und ich möchte auch, dass Sie verstehen, was die Beziehung ist zwischen den Christen und den Muslimen, dass Sie sehen, was diese Beziehung ist zwischen den Christen in Ägypten. Wie Sie wissen, dieses Wort Kopt kommt von der ägyptischen Sprache. Es bedeutet eigentlich Ägypter, aber wir meinen damit die Christen in Ägypten. Wir haben die koptische katholische Kirche, wir haben die orthodoxe, die christliche Kirche, die katholische Kirche, die Orthodoxen auch. Und wir haben 100 Millionen von Muslimen auch. Und wie ich schon erwähnt habe, benutzen wir nicht diese herkömmliche Art und Weise, zwischen Ägypten und zwischen Muslimen und Christen zu unterscheiden. Wir sagen nur die ägyptische Bürger und Bürgerinnen. Wir haben das geändert. Auch unter uns, unter Muslimen und Christen. Und wir haben diese Art und Weise zu reden geändert, und zwar vor 10 Jahren. Und wir haben eine andere Art und Weise und nicht uns irgendwie zu entschuldigen, aber wir haben eine gute Beziehung zwischen der muslimischen Bevölkerung und der christlichen Bevölkerung. Wir haben auch Bischof Paula, er war Mitglied der Familie sozusagen, diese Organisation, die Christen und Muslime verbindet. Das heißt Family House. Und Bischof Paula war auch ein Mitglied. Und sie arbeiten innerhalb der Gesellschaft Ägyptens. Und ich möchte, dass Sie das sehen. Diese reale Situation in Ägypten, das nicht nur, was man darüber hört. Danke. Thank you. Please come to the microphone. Ich muss sagen, dass Präsident Sisi, hier rede ich auf Englisch. President Sisi is always very pleased when we have a project or a cooperative agreement with Germany. He respects Germany quite a bit. And that's why there are 14 advisors for the president, and 6 of them come from Germany. And that there is a true desire to have a stronger cooperation with Germany. And that's why I'd like to discuss some of the projects with colleagues here so that we can address those projects here in Bavaria as well. I implemented a Bavarian Egyptian project and has very good reception. It was sustainable. We created a sustainable forest in the desert in Egypt. And we've had an incredible growth. And this was 4.5 times faster, in fact, growth than we would have had in Germany. In this desert area, we were just so surprised that we had a higher CO2 capture than in the rainforest. And this was a Bavarian Egyptian project. Thank you very much.
Ich möchte noch gerne etwas hinzufügen. Gestern fragte mich jemand, ich weiß nicht mehr, in welcher Kirche das war. Er sagte zu mir, die Christen zahlen Kirchensteuer Und ich sagte, nein, alle Ägypter zahlen Steuern an den Staat. Daraufhin fragte er mich, was der Staat macht. Beispielsweise bekommen wir vom Staat Grundstücke, auf denen wir Kirchen bauen können. Wir zahlen auch nicht für Strom. Für die Moscheen und die Kirchen ist das kostenlos. Ich habe auch mal mit einem Regierungsvertreter von Gaza gesprochen. Ich hatte kein Geld, um das zu erbauen. Ich scherze natürlich nur. Vor 10 Jahren, 16 Jahren, erhielt ich 4 Grundstücke als Geschenk vom Staat, um in diesen neuen Städten Kirchen zu erbauen. Ich habe erfolgreich 2 Kirchen gebaut, aber um die anderen 2 zu erbauen, brauche ich noch mehr Gelder. Und das wollte ich noch hinzufügen. I think it's great to hear what you are doing. This movie really impressed me. The school, this Franciscan school, which was destructed. We've seen the pictures. People who were amazed by this destruction. At the same time, we saw this entire reestablishment of the church in its prime. And what really, truly impressed me were the children, Christians and Muslim children, working and studying together, having this light in their eyes. And I am truly convinced that in the future, this will be possible, that if children are instilled with freedom and peace and what it means to treat each other with respect and to live peacefully together, I would like to ask you, how far can this thought of community go? And how can Muslim families keep this thought within their family? You mentioned briefly that there's family associations or houses. Can something be done in this aspect? And I'm sure it can be done. But can this thought be instilled into Muslim families? Ja, wie ich bereits erwähnt habe, haben wir in unserer Arbeit als Diözese 3 wichtige politische Aspekte oder gesellschaftliche Aspekte. Für die katholischen Christen, dann gibt es den gesellschaftlichen Aspekt. Hier arbeiten wir mit der gesamten Bevölkerung zusammen, mit den Menschen, unabhängig davon, ob sie muslimisch oder christlich sind. Es geht wirklich um den Aspekt der Gesellschaft. Wir tun unser Mögliches, damit wir diese Mentalität, dieses Gedankengut, dieser Gedanke von Pluralität, dass wir diesen Gedanken weiter voranbringen. Vielleicht sorgen wir uns alle um unsere Identität, aber manchmal können wir unsere Identität auch erweitern. Wir können uns bewusst dahin trainieren, dass wir die Pluralität der Religionen verstehen, verschiedene Glaubensansätze, und das ist genau das, was wir in unserer Gesellschaft, in unseren Gemeinden tun. Wie wir das auch im Video bereits gesehen haben. Ms. Adly, I'd like to ask you, you are working in education, diversity and accepting diversity, finding common ground. From your perspective, is this feasible for this community? You know, other countries such as Tunisia. Is this the right path for the future? Yes, of course. I would like to repeat what Mr. Radwan just said. Not only for Egypt, But because we're talking about Egypt today, it's all about education, education, education. It starts with children. That's not the area where we're mainly working in. We are mostly working in the vocational education, further education, and there's different societal groups. We have young women, young men. We're working in men-dominated sectors, but we manage to encourage women to get into these sectors, for example, construction, and thus we can create this common sense, common understanding of religion, this feeling of belonging somewhere, and that's why it's so essential to focus on education, and it can help us closing this gap between rural areas and the cities, people coming from a high education background and people who might not have access to further or higher education, and we need to address all aspects of the community. Only if we shape education together, then we can have an exchange, a discourse. Just one example, we do a lot of trainings for ongoing teachers. And there's a huge conflicting line between state schools, public organizations, and the private economy. We're not talking about adolescents. We're talking about teachers that need certain qualification, people coming from an economic background. And if we combine all these groups, then there's these prejudices that they are not doing it right. It's not true to what's going on in the economy. And on the other hand, again, there's these stereotypes that they are not qualified. It's just about finding cheaper staff. And only through these common trainings for these groups, we can create a good communication. That's just one example, and that's actually not our beneficiaries that are profiting from it. It's part of the society that can get a common understanding, a common goal for the development and training of the youth. And I think we can only achieve that through education. Are there any questions? Could you please go to the microphone? Could someone give him the microphone? We want to talk about this cooperation between the Isar and the Nile, and it was barely mentioned, and it's something which for a very long time has worked extremely well, from Adly until Fahad al-Sisi. Culture and art have worked as a field of common interest between Egypt and Bavaria. I am stressing Bavaria here because Bavaria has played an important role. Let me remark that the most intensive cooperation between Bavaria and Cairo is the Egypt Museum, where 1,200 visitors visit per weekend and 100,000 visitors. So I'm asking myself if the presence of Egypt could be added by a presence of Bavaria in Egypt, in this region, for example, by a special exhibition. We have a lot of museums which could have an exhibition of European art and show that in museums in Cairo, in Egypt. That could be a job for the Cultural Ministry in Bavaria. It's also a task for the Hans Seidel Foundation and dear Dr. Wieshoy. This is also a job for our German-Egyptian Friendship Society. And so let me just say that there's a lot of potential already in terms of the culture, and we could expand this cultural experience between Bavaria and Cairo, and maybe expand Bavaria's presence in Cairo and have or play a more important role than it is today. Thank you for this remark. You are absolutely right. Most often we talk about politics and the economy, but you are definitely right. There are options to put a stronger focus on the cultural aspect between our two countries. Dr. Wieshoy, you were addressed directly. Yes, let me answer your question. You've been the head of the Egypt Museum, in Berlin, and the vice president of the German Arab Friendship Society. I want to say this. Alexander Radon said we have to talk about experiences. In the past, before we went on this delegation journey, we always had this preparational seminar. And there was always someone who had a strong sense of the culture, religion, and who advised us on these aspects. In 1991 and 1992, we had a study. I know this because I signed it back then. People are learning language, the history, culture, also the negotiation culture. And from my experience, I think it was always very beneficial for people to go there, not only receiving respect from people from the visiting country, also having a good exchange on religion. You need to be aware of how to talk with this culture. An Arabic person might say, yes, we're doing it, or no, we're not doing it. That's how we do it in Germany. And it's only a yes for Arabic-speaking people if they give you their permission and a yes. And these cultural aspects need to be taken into account. We have to appreciate and respect their culture. I think sometimes we forget that they have a history which is thousands of years old. Looking at the temple in Theben, looking at exhibition sites in Egypt or in Sudan. It's a history which we should all deeply respect. And saying that is essential. It's part of the cultural tradition in this country. And the third point I wanted to address, you mentioned education, vocational training, further education or higher education. We need to do more. We need to support the middle class more strongly. We did this in a different country, in China, where we invested into technology, mechanical engineering. And they did the exact same training as we would have done in Bavaria. And so we had people take their exams here. They became self-employed, and they were really desired here. That was a good educational development. And what was interesting for me, recently the Egyptian ambassador visited us. We had a 2-day program, He was interested in vocational training. He's interested in academical training and also interested in startups, entrepreneurship, how people in Garching here in Munich are working in terms of entrepreneurship. So other countries, such as Saudi Arabia or Qatar, do that more easily. And I think we should also work on that in Egypt. We are strongly interested in that. Another point I wanted to mention, there's 10 German schools in Egypt. People are speaking German, they have experience in healthcare and so on, and they are interested in coming to Germany as professionals. And if you take a look at Germany's situation, we are missing a lot of professionals, especially in healthcare. And I mean, with the potential of Egyptian professionals that could possibly work here in Germany, then that could cover a big problem, basically. In 1986, I think, he visited us and he systemically brought students to Germany. They got to know the German economy, and now they are the contact person for people in Tunisia, for example. So there's 300 German companies in Tunisia with lots of expertise and knowledge, because German-speaking engineers, well aware of the German economy, are working there. We talked with representatives of the state Baden-Württemberg here in Germany, and they might only have 10 or 12,000 people, and they are all very reliable because they have this bridge between qualified people and professionals, and that's the key. And that's something we could push forward in Egypt, just on a basic level. We need to take into account people and their religion, their history. We should acknowledge their qualities and their features, because only then we'll be thriving as countries. Because the worst mistake we can do is not acknowledging their qualities or thinking that we are better qualified than Egyptians. And so I agree with you, this cultural area is definitely fundamental in this area. Thank you. So there's time for one more question. Yes, one question. Last question. Because we at Missio Munich are kind of part of it. One question that is affecting me, because there were some changes. Minister Müller saw this as a good chance to cooperate, but your goal of having Bavarian economy, do you see the opportunity of a cooperation in this area? Maybe also to you, Bishop? Or are we only focusing on the economy because that would be a good point to do so? I can only speak for the BBV. We are in principle open to all kinds of partnerships. We are not limited to only working or cooperating with companies or public institutions, only working with foundations. It's really open. We have a contract for cooperation with Tunisia by the Heinz-Seidel Foundation. We've worked with the Heinrich Böll Foundation, so we are really, really open. What's important to us is the topics. We are not doing higher education. We're not doing basic training or education. We are more focused on the vocational and further education. What do we understand by this? Professional training could be projects we initiated in Tunisia, where within 6 to 8 weeks, refugees were being trained for the labor market so that they were able to get into work. Prior to that, they did a vocational training. We tested their qualifications, and then we work with a local NGO. They work with partners to ensure that these refugees found work. We're talking about 6 to 8 weeks in which time they received their training, their qualifications, and the vocational integration. In Tunisia, we're working on projects, among others, with Marcos Drexelmeier, which is a Bavarian company, large German companies where we offer dual education opportunities. We give them the necessary equipment, we're training the trainees so that they can train more students. We always adapt the curriculums, which are not taking as long. Of course, it needs to be within the framework of the local function. We will not copy our system one by one. It's just an extract of the best solutions we have to enable that students get the best possible qualification. So it's a completely different model, and it's always depending on what does the partner country need, what kind of needs are there, what kind of prior qualifications do they have, what's the target group, and what's basically the end result. That's why I mentioned the diversified options we have. Sometimes we have options for farmers in agriculture, in the food sector, also constructing after this dual education system. So we are really open. You can always contact me. We are always ready for feedback, and I am definitely also interested in coming up with new ideas. That sounds very promising, and it also allows us to stay in touch, which I would hope to do so. I think having meetings like these, conferences like these, allow us to have an open discussion, helps us to be learning from one another, especially during these times. It's essential. Thank you so much for this great discourse. I'm looking forward to more conversations. We'll have food in a second. You can have open discussions, and maybe there's some more questions, more personal conversations. So thank you so much for everyone here. Thank you especially to the Hans Seidel Foundation for giving us the opportunity to be here today. That's Burchard. It was really a joy to prepare this event. Maybe we can celebrate the 5th year anniversary of our cooperation. We'll do our utmost, and hopefully we'll come together again. Thank you so much to Dr. Otto Wieshol, Laurin Atelan, Alexander Radwan, he's already on his way to Berlin. And thank you so much to our guests from Egypt, Thomas Adly, Bishop Ayub. All the best to you, and thank you.
Herzlichen Dank. Danke für die Diskussion. Vielen Dank für die Diskussion. Danke für die guten Beiträge.
Thank you for your wonderful contributions as well.
Die Türen öffnen sich.
The doors are
Sie
open.
dürfen gerne kurz durchatmen.
You're welcome to take a breath or stay here and engage in conversation. Have a safe trip home. All the best.